Good evening, and welcome to Sports 101, the show that discusses sport beyond the X's and O's. Here we like to expand our conversation of sport to include the history, past, present, as well as in the making. We also look at the game from a people, places, and cultural perspective. I'm your host, Jamar Harp. Be sure to follow me on social media at Coach_Hart412 and Facebook under Jamar Harp. Make sure you get social with Sports 101 and the litany of other SportsZone Chicago shows by following SportsZone Chicago on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago. Remember, SportsZone Chicago is a sports talk app. You can keep up with my show, Sean and Maya in the morning, What's Up Cuz, the Smoke Fellas, any show, and all the new ones in the lineup that have not been released yet. Please log in and go to YouTube, search Sports Zone Chicago. Please subscribe to the Sports Zone Chicago YouTube channel. But more importantly, we need everyone to download the Sports Zone Chicago app. Again, the Sports Zone Chicago app is the only Black-owned sports talk app in the United States. You can find the Sports Zone Chicago app on the iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon stores. Now I'd like to introduce this week's episode entitled Angola de Capoeira, Angola's Mixed Martial Art. Everyone knows about capoeira due to its popularity in movies. However, we're going to go to a deep, in-depth introduction in regards to the history of capoeira. So I want to start off by showing you a quick video, then we'll begin our presentation.
It's a martial art, a dance, a fight. But for these young Angolans, capoeira is above all a way to get in touch with their history. The Portuguese, the first to leave their colonial footprint on Africa, arrived in what is now Angola in the 15th century. By the mid-1800s, as many as 4 million Africans had been captured and shipped across the Atlantic.
Capoeira started as a traditional dance among the African slaves sent to Brazil. For them, it was like a cry for freedom.
Through movement and music, the slaves, who spoke different languages, were able to communicate. But capoeira was also conceived as a self-defense technique. Performed close to the ground, it combines fluid moves with kicks and sweeps. Capoeira's similarity with Angolan traditional dance and its use of local instruments like the berimbau make it unmistakably African, an empowering fact for these young capoeiristas.
I know capoeira is from here and now it's practiced around the world, so I'm very proud because it's ours, its roots are here.
I'm never going to stop practicing. I'll continue because I love capoeira.
Many people still see capoeira as a Brazilian invention. But this will certainly change as the discipline becomes more and more popular and its true African origins harder to ignore.
All right, thank you. So that's a brief introduction to capoeira, and particularly Angola capoeira from Angola. So if we look at the root of the word Angola, which means strength and power in that Congo Bantu language, is basically a performance of ritual combat by various ethnic groups around the Qan River in southern Angola. Their style of fighting, which does derive from a specific style of dance in Angola, involves various kicks, dodges, and leg sweeps, similar to what the video stated, with an emphasis on inverted positions, i.e. with your hands on the ground and using your strongest bone in your legs to attack people. Angola is one of the several African martial arts of the African diaspora that's found its way to the Americas. Portuguese explorer Neves de Sousa described Angola as part of a rite of passage between young boys vying for a bride in a contest. The techniques somewhat are derived from the particular way in which zebras fight amongst themselves, hence the inverted positions. If we look at this picture right here, We will see the inverted positions that we're talking about, with the one man on his hands coming across with a double leg kick. How did all this begin and how did it get to Brazil? Well, in 1492, again, we referenced the Papal Bull of Demarcation, which was put together by the Pope of the Catholic Church, and it basically split the world in half and allowed Spain and Portugal to colonize on their respective sides so they would not wage war against each other. So looking at this picture right here, we can see the red line in the middle, i.e. the line of demarcation, splitting the world in half. So you see the Spanish side on the west and the eastern side, the Portuguese side on the east, purely based off of this map right here. Now, during the 16th century, the Portuguese bought, sold, and traded, as well as transported Africans against their will to a lot of their colonies. Brazil, being the largest with its vast territory, receives almost 40% of these African people via the transatlantic slave trade. Originally, their ancestors' traditions originated from the Kingdom of Congo, also known as Angola, pretty much known as the current country of Angola today. Again, a type of ritual dance that was used several elements of kicking, head-butting, slap boxing, walking on one's hands, deception, as well as invasion. The purpose was also religious, as it provided a link to the afterlife, which was the opposite of the living world, and enabled a person to channel their ancestors through their dance. So you can possibly, if you were skilled and you had a great touch with the spirit per se, you could channel maybe a former relative that was a great capoeira in the past, or channel something that give you strength in your use of this martial art. For example, during the dance, the person might become possessed by a particular ancestor that was talented and a specific skill or trait, and you can use that to your advantage. Very similar to, if you remember, the cartoon Captain Planet, where individuals had rings and they had a different spirit in the rings, and when they came together, the entity Captain Planet came out. So all this is derived to these original African spiritual systems that deal with ancestor worship and nature. So during the transatlantic slave trade, the traditions transferred around the Americas. You had Brazil, that you got capoeira from. In the Caribbean, we have domine. In the United States, the knocking and kicking, more people call kickboxing. So in the 16th century, the Portuguese had claimed one of the largest territories of the colonial empires. That was of Spain, England, all the European colonial empires that were trying to merge. But they lacked the people to colonize it, as again, Portugal was not as established nation as some of these other European nations. In the Brazilian colony, the Portuguese, like many European colonies, choose to use chattel slavery to build their economy. Um, After defeat of Queen Anne Nzinga of Angola, who is pictured right here, the Portuguese colonized Angola and began chattel slavery, taking Angolan as well as Congo citizens to Brazil. Queen Anne Nzinga fought the Portuguese for over 20 years before losing the war. So this was a longitudinal amount of time. It just didn't happen overnight. In the first century, the main economic activity in the colony was a production and processing of sugar cane. Remember, other areas of the world didn't have access to basic goods that we have now: sugar, salt, lye, things of that nature. So to get sugar around the world to flavor people's drinks and beverages, as well as uses in baking and other cooking essentials, was big, and it made Portuguese rise up in Portugal rise in power. The Portuguese colonists, they created large sugarcane farms called iningos, literally engines, because that's where all their economic activity stemmed from. But again, all these engines were dependent on the enslaved labor of people that were captured against their will. These Africans living in inhumane conditions were enslaved and forced to work hard and often suffered physical punishment for small behaviors. Um, Again, some of these small behaviors was not keeping up with production, looking someone in the eye, little things like that that you would consider humans do. Of course, being an enslaved person at that time or deemed enslaved, those things were punished. Although enslaved Africans often outnumbered the colonists, rebellions were rare at this time because the lack of weapons, the colonial laws, which forbid gatherings, and oftentimes this system of chattel slavery was more violent than the United States, where people would be chained up all day, 24/7. They will be worked until they died, and they will be replaced. Um, but also, they let them congregate within their own tribal or ethnic cultural groups because they felt they would work faster together. Another main thing that stopped revolts was at this time in the first century of Brazil will be the lack of knowledge about the new land and its surroundings. So if we look at this picture right here, you can see some people practicing Angola or Capoeira, and if you see to the far left, someone coming to stop that because again, it had to be uh, constructed as a dance, so that way it wouldn't be seen as threatening to their enslavers. Capoeira originated within as a product of the Angolan tradition of Ngolo, which became implied as a method of survival that was known to the enslaved Africans. So not only they use it as a ritual dance to sing songs, channel the ancestors, began to practice, fighting skills for the day that they would use it. Um, Again, it was used as a tool which helped people escape from bondage, completely unequipped. Using capoeira, they could survive in a hostile, unknown land and faced in the hunt of the capites. It was sort of like the slave catchers in the United States. They were armed and mounted Portuguese colonial agents who were charged with finding and capturing enslaved Africans who had fled. Brazil became more urbanized in the 17th and 18th century, and the nature of capoeira largely stayed the same again because the people were coming from the same place. However, the nature of slavery began to change, and that differed between that which was happening in the United States. Um, Brazil became to get industrialized. Remember, they have a lot of rainforest and inhabited land in a lot of places. And a lot of people were colonizing the cities to avoid the mosquitoes and all the diseases that came with them. Remember, Europeans don't have the sickle cell trait, so they're prone to a lot of diseases that may happen in these type of tropical environments. So many of the enslaved African worked in the cities that the Portuguese lived in and were most of the time outside their master's supervision, again, so they wouldn't be around these mosquitoes and different bugs, and they would be tasked with finding work to do or be hired out to do any form of manual labor. And in return, they would give almost their entire share of what they made to their master or so-called master. So it was basically a form of pimping in a sense. And this is where capoeira was common, as it created opportunities for the Africans to practice during and after work if they were away from their enslavers. Um, Even though it was tolerated at this time until the 1800s, it quickly became criminalized after due to its association with being African, as well as a threat to the current ruling regime. So again, when people executed this dance, it was said to invoke the power of their ancestors, give them a sense of pride and belonging to where they were from. And again, a person that knows itself cannot be, a slave, no matter what you call them. So they start to see more and more revolts. Again, this was due to the difference in the systems of chattel slavery. Where in America, you were wiped of everything. You were told to change your name. The Portuguese didn't bother with that, and henceforth you see all these movements come about. Soon there began several groups of enslaved persons who liberated themselves and gathered and established settlements. These settlements were known as Quimbolos, in far hard to reach places in the mountains, similar like Queen Nanny did in Jamaica. And these were in the mountains in Brazil, and some in the deep, rainforest. And these kimbolos begin to increase in size, and they begin to attract more. They were called fugitives, or Africans that freed themselves from bondage. So people would run into the woods, into the forest, and try to make contact with these kimbolos. Some of these people were enslaved Africans, but you also had Brazilian natives and Europeans escaping the law or Christian extremism. Remember, at this time, Christianity was fairly new, so a lot of people were overzealous in their practice of it, and they imposed a lot of laws that you had to do to be so forth a strict Christian at this time. Some of these kimbolos would grow to an enormous size and actually become independent multi-ethnic cities, or African cities. Everyday life in the kimbolo offered freedom and the opportunity to revive traditional cultures through song, dance, and food, away from colonial oppression. And these kind of communities, they were constantly threatened by Portuguese colonial troops, because they would raid, burn down the forest, send out dogs, etc. And capoeira evolved from this as a survival tool, as the martial art began to focus on wars. They used it to keep the Portuguese troops off of them in the woods and in these kimbolos. Again, the Africans in these kimbolos would raid the Portuguese cities and free their brethren using guerrilla warfare and the martial art of capoeira. This picture right here is the biggest kimbolo, the Kimbolo dos Palmares, which consisted of many villages and lasted more than 100 years, resisting at least 24 small attacks and 18 Portuguese colonial invasions. This picture right here is the last leader of that Kimbolo. This is Zumbi. He lived from 1655 to 1695. He's also known as Zumbi dos Palmares. He was kidnapped from the Congo region and became a Kimbolo leader, being one of the pioneers of the resistance to slavery of Africans, of the Portuguese in Brazil at that time. He was the last king of the Kimbolo dos Palmares, and this was a settlement of Afro-Brazilians. Again, some of them had been kidnapped from Africa. Some of them had been born in Brazil, hence the term Afro-Brazilians, who had liberated themselves from enslavement and that same settlement. And this city is in the present-day state of Alagoas, and that's a current city in Brazil right now. Zumbi today is revered as an Afro-Brazilian cultural icon, and he's a symbol of resistance and oppression against the enslavement of Africans in the colony of Brazil, especially in Salvador de Bahia, where you find a large contingent of Afro-Brazilians. He was married to a queen and great warrior called Dandara, who was also of Afro-Congolese descent. At its height, Palmares had over 30,000 citizens who were either former enslaved and runaway Africans, or were born to enslaved or runaway Africans in Brazil, and they band together and fought while liberating their kin at the same time. Portuguese soldiers sometimes said it took more than one dragoon or a platoon of Portuguese soldiers to capture a Kimbolo warrior, since they would defend themselves with a strangely moving fighting technique. Again, this was a revolutionary martial art because they didn't stand still and they moved to a rhythm, would hide in the shadows, drop down from trees, basically guerrilla warfare. The governor of the province declared it's harder to defeat Kimbolo than the invasion of the Dutch. Remember, in West Africa, a lot of colonies or a lot of colonial powers fought for power on that coast, and the Dutch were one of them. So by the end of the 19th century, slavery was on the verge of departing the Brazilian Empire. The reasons for this included the growing Kimbolo militia raids on the plantations that still use slaves, the refusal of the Brazilian army to deal with the escapees, and the growth of the Brazilian abolitionist movements. So similar to the United States, um, due to violence, like Nat Turner's rebellion and all the rebellions in the United States, it became dangerous. The Portuguese Empire tried to soften the problem with laws to restrict slavery, but finally Brazil would recognize the end of the institution on May 13th, 1888, with a law called Lei Aurea, translated is called the Golden Law, sanctioned by Imperial Parliament and signed by Princess Isabel. At this time, former free slaves now felt abandoned. Again, they weren't Brazilian citizens. Most of them had nowhere to live, no jobs, and were despised by Brazilian society. I was usually viewed them as lazy workers. And that's very funny because they worked exclusively for free. But then once they escaped bondage, were totally against the society and tried to burn it down at every chance they got. There also was new immigration from Europe and Asia that left most former slaves with no employment. So if you think of the factories in Western Pennsylvania and Ohio and different places in the North, when after the Civil War ended, they could have hired individuals, but instead they contracted employment from Europe. Um, at this time, capoeiristas started to use their skills in unconventional ways to make money. Some people turned to the criminal lifestyle. They would strap knives and different things to their ankles and wrists, and in these spinning movements would strike you in vital areas, and people would bleed out. Some people became warlords against, again, the Brazilian state, and others employed capoeiristas sort of like samurai in ancient Japan, and they were hired as bodyguards and assassins. There were two main group of capoeiristas at this time, um, and they were these groups are known as Maltas, and they can constantly raided the main city of Rio de Janeiro. These two main Malta groups were the Nagos. The Nagos were composed of Africans, and Guiamuns were composed of native blacks, people of mixed race, poor whites, and Portuguese immigrants. So basically, one group was people that were transported from Africa, and then the other group were people that were a native black, is your parent may have been captured, but you were born in Brazil. Then the people of mixed race, so if you mix with Portuguese or one of the indigenous tribes of Brazil, and then the poor whites that came over couldn't get their hegemony, so they just turned on the establishment. So the Nagos and the Gamoons were used respectively as a hit force by the political parties at this time, the conservative and liberal parties. In 1890, they recently proclaimed Brazilian Republic, decreed the prohibition of capoeira in the whole country. It was devilish, they claimed. They invoked devil spirits to move the way they did. Um, so it was against Christianity. Again, social conditions were chaotic in the Brazilian capital, and police reported identified capoeira as an advantage in fighting. So that's another reason why it was outlawed. After prohibition, any citizen caught practicing capoeira in a fight or for any reason would be arrested, tortured, and often mutilated by the police. Cultural practices such as Roda de Capoeira, where you get in a circle and play the instruments and sing, were conducted in remote places at this time, such as in the woods, with sentries to warn of approaching police so they can break. So again, this goes to show you the fear that this system had brought on, simply because it was used by people that were brought against their will and just wanted to be free. Um, I would like to take a quick break, and I will give you some more information on our Sports Zone Chicago family with a quick commercials, and then we'll be back right back. This is Jamar Harp with Sports 101.
Please stop and listen because this important message may directly apply to you or someone dear to you. Several thousand African American former full-time CPS teachers were unfairly terminated starting in the mid-90s and continuing to the 2000s. If you are one of those many former CPS teachers who was unjustly terminated, or if you are the immediate relative of a now deceased unjustly terminated former CPS teacher, you may qualify to participate in a lawsuit at no upfront cost to you. Please call 773-580-7183 immediately for more information. That's 773-580-7183. Do not delay. Act today, because time is of the essence. That's 773-580-7183. 773-580-7183.
Welcome back. I'm Jamar Harp, and again, this is Sports 101, that show that discusses sport beyond the X's and O's. We like to take our conversation to include the game and look at it from a people, places, and cultural perspective. We also look at sport through the lens of history, past, present, as well as in the making. Again, please get social with Sports 101 and a litany of other SportsZone Chicago shows by following SportsZone Chicago on social media. You can follow SportsZone Chicago on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, search SportsZone Chicago, but more importantly, download the SportsZone Chicago app. The SportsZone Chicago app can be found in the iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon stores. Now, continuing in our brief history of capoeira, we went over the early history and how capoeira was outlawed. Now we want to start in the 1900s. So by the 1920s, the capoeira repression had declined, and some physical educators and martial artists started to incorporate capoeira as either a fighting style or a gymnastic method for fitness. Professor Mario Alexio was the first in showing that capoeira revised, or he made it bigger and better, in which Professor Alexio, he mixed judo, wrestling, and other arts to create what he called defesa pessoal, or personal defense in Portuguese. In 1928, Anibal Zuma published the first capoeira manual, Gimnástico Nacional Capoeirano, where he was also introduced boxing-like rules for capoeira competitions. And Isel Mena Marino published a similar book, Maestro Zenhozina from Rio de Janeiro went further, creating a different training method that divested the capoeira from all its music and traditions in the process of making it a complete martial art. So he stripped the African element with the music and the singing and the instruments and just made it a martial art for competition. With those efforts to help keep capoeira alive, they had the consequences that the pure, non-adulterated form of capoeira became increasingly rare. So we're going to show you some examples from that form right here. All right, so basically that video showed some capoeira basics, starting with the genga, which is the literal rocking back and forth motion to getting your basic capoeira movements. The genga is the fundamental movement of capoeira and is important for both attacks as well as defensive purposes. You saw the gentleman keeping his arm in front of his face so that way he wouldn't get struck with an attack. Again, this Jenga has two main objectives. One is to keep the capoeirista in a state of constant motion, so it's hard to attack him, and also prevent him or her from being still an easy target while allowing them to sneak in attacks that most people wouldn't think of because most opponents fight in this stationary motion. The other importance of it is using the fakes and the feints, which is to mislead or evade your opponent, leaving them open for attack or counterattack based off their aggressive movements. The rota is the circle formed by the capoeiristas and capoeira musical instruments, where every single participant sings songs and claps their hands to the music, most often in the call and response method, again, due to its West African origins. Two capoeiristas enter the rota and play the game according to the style required by the pace of the music, meaning as the music speeds up, they will speed up their movements similar to dancing so they can stay in rhythm. The game finishes when one of the musicians holding a berimbau determine it, or when one of the capoeiristas decide to leave or call into the game, or when another capoeirista interrupts the game to start playing, or calls someone out, or jumps in to show his skill or ability. Um, we have to go to the chamada or the call, and that can happen anytime during the rota where the rhythm and goal is being played again. Where you can call someone out and jump in the rota to show your skills. And usually it happens when one player, usually the one more advanced, calls his or opponent out in a dance-like ritual and takes the middle of the floor, similar to how these dance phases go on now, where you're dancing against people and you take the center and you don't leave until someone out dances you. The opponent then approaches the caller and meets him or her to walk side by side, demonstrating they accept the challenge as they enter the rota. After they both enter the rota, both resume into their play or dance until one shows superior skill. Again, music is very integral to capoeira. It sets the tempo and style of the game, as well as conditioning, because if you can do capoeira, the fast-paced music for a long time, that makes you, a really great athlete and you're in shape. Typically, the music is formed by instruments and singing. The rhythms are controlled by each specific instrument, and they're called berimbau, and they differ from very slow or to fast, and this can be dependent on the style of the rota. So again, I want to show you a quick video on that so we can just kind of break down and really see how this movement's really placed in the actual capoeira rota. All right, so we just saw those capoeira right there performing in a traditional rota. So think of the time in Brazil when you had people that were kidnapped, treated second class, oftentimes that were bigger, faster, and stronger than you, empower themselves with a martial art. They come attack you with it with razors on their wrists and arms and legs. So you're getting hit and cut in places you never saw before. The technology is one shot rifles mostly at this time and one shot pistols. So there's a lot of guerrilla warfare going on. So think of how terrifying that can be. If you listen to the songs that we're singing in there, that's one of the things, and one of the I would like to address now. Oftentimes you hear in songs the river Parana address, and this is a huge river in South America which crosses into Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay, forming the border between Paraguay and Argentina. It's the second largest river in South America after the Amazon. This river has special significance for capoeira due to the Paraguayan War between 1864 and 1870, which is one of the largest and bloodiest wars of South American history. And this war was fought between the Triple Alliance of Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay against Paraguay. Brazil, they sent many enslaved Africans to fight in the war with Paraguay, and they promised that when or if they return, they would be emancipated and can live as free citizens in Brazil. Those lucky enough to survive the war returned to Brazil from Paraguay following the river Parana and sang their songs in celebration. So many fighters are credited their survival to having trained in capoeira. So they would sing remember the river's name is Parana. So they were saying Parananue, Parananue, Paranue, and they were giving reference to the river. However, in American culture, most people think that's a song when they say Banana Way or something like that, but they're actually talking about the river involved in the war. And the rest of the words of the song are I'm leaving this land, here I will never return, Paranana, here I'm not loved, but in my land I am. So that's basically what they were talking about. So in closing, I hope everyone enjoyed this brief introduction to the West African martial art known as capoeira. Again, it is solely based out of the West Africa from the country of Angola. This martial art has revolutionized conventional fighting styles that we know today, and through its natural style was used to fight political and physical oppression and became a symbol of that to the people that created it, as well as to people in the African diaspora. So thank you for tuning in with me. Again, I'm Jamar Harp, and this is this week's episode of Sports 101. Please be sure to follow me on Twitter at Coach_Harp412 and Facebook under the name Jamar Harp. Please make sure you get social with Sports 101 and a litany of other Sports Zone Chicago shows while following Sports Zone Chicago on social media. Sports Zone Chicago can be found on Twitter at Sports Zone CHI, Facebook at Sports Zone Chicago, and Instagram at Sports Zone Chicago. Remember, subscribe to our YouTube channel, search Sports Zone Chicago, but more importantly, download the Sports Zone Chicago app. The Sports Zone Chicago app can be found on the iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon stores. Thank you for tuning in this week's episode of Sports 101, and I will see you next week on our scheduled time, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. And I'm gone.